Hello, everyone. My name is Susan, and I am 33 years old. Recently, I had to make one of the hardest decisions of my life. It was not easy, but looking back, I know it was the right thing to do. This is my story about my relationship with my now ex-husband, Eric, and how I found the strength to walk away from a situation that was making me unhappy. Eric and I met through mutual friends. From the very beginning, we had a strong connection. We had so much in common, and our relationship felt effortless. We rarely argued, and it seemed like we understood each other perfectly. Everything felt almost too good to be true. After a year of dating, Eric decided it was time for me to meet his mother. I was excited about this, thinking it was a step forward in our relationship. The day I met Eric's mother, I was expecting a warm welcome. Instead, the evening took an unexpected turn. During dinner, Eric's mother asked how long we had been together. When I answered, she suddenly brought up Elizabeth, Eric's high school and college girlfriend. She talked about how Eric and Elizabeth were perfect for each other and even questioned why they had never married. At first, I thought she was just reminiscing, but as the conversation continued, I realized she was comparing me to Elizabeth. She mentioned how Elizabeth was pursuing a doctorate in world languages while I was just an accountant. She even pointed out differences in our personalities and made it clear that she preferred Elizabeth over me. It felt as if she was saying that I was a backup choice, someone who could never measure up to the woman she truly wanted as her daughter-in-law. As the dinner went on, Eric's mother continued making comments about Elizabeth, even suggesting that Eric should reconsider his relationship with her. I couldn't stay silent any longer and objected to being treated like a second choice. But to my surprise, instead of standing up for me, Eric sided with his mother. He asked me to respect her, even though she was being openly disrespectful to me. That night was a turning point for me. I realized that Eric's past was still very much a part of his present, and more importantly, I saw that he wasn't willing to defend me when it mattered most. I started questioning my place in this relationship and whether I was truly happy. After that dinner, I noticed changes in Eric's behavior. I caught him looking at Elizabeth's social media and even considering reconnecting with her. When I confronted him, he brushed it off, saying it was just curiosity. I wanted to believe him, so I let it go. I also began avoiding Eric's mother, Betty. Every time I saw her, she would bring up Elizabeth and compare us. It always led to arguments between Eric and me. But despite all of this, when Eric proposed, I said yes. I convinced myself that marriage would strengthen our relationship and that things would get better once we were officially husband and wife. The wedding day was beautiful, but unfortunately, our marriage was not. Betty's comments about Elizabeth didn't stop. In fact, they became worse. She constantly reminded me that Elizabeth was more accomplished, more suited for Eric, and a better match for their family. The worst part, Eric never defended me. He acted like it wasn't a big deal, and I felt like I had to tolerate it because I loved him. Then, something unexpected happened. Betty suddenly stopped talking about Elizabeth. I thought that maybe she had finally accepted me. Around the same time, Eric started acting more present in our relationship. I felt relieved, thinking we had turned a new page, but my happiness didn't last long. One day, as I was about to charge Eric's phone, a message popped up on the screen. It was from Elizabeth. Curious, I opened it and was shocked by what I saw. Eric had told Elizabeth that he was single. I couldn't believe it. When I confronted him, he tried to explain, saying it was foolish but harmless. He claimed he was just curious to see how Elizabeth would react. His words felt like a knife to my heart. How could he not see how wrong this was? How could he dismiss my feelings so easily? He argued that he wasn't planning on meeting her, but to me, that didn't change the fact that he had lied about our marriage. He called my reaction jealousy, but in reality, I just felt betrayed. His inability to see how much he had hurt me made me realize something important. Love alone isn't enough. A relationship needs trust and respect, and Eric had broken both. For 2 weeks, I couldn't bring myself to speak to him. I needed time to process everything. When we finally talked, Eric assured me that he wouldn't meet Elizabeth, but his words felt empty. It didn't feel like he was choosing me because he loved me. It felt like he was choosing me because he had no other choice. I tried to move past it, but deep down, I knew something had changed between us. Still, I wanted to believe in our marriage, so we both agreed to work on our relationship. Then, Thanksgiving arrived. Betty invited us to her house for a family dinner. I wasn't particularly excited, but I decided to go for the sake of keeping the peace. When we arrived, I was stunned to see Elizabeth there. Betty explained that Elizabeth was part of the family and had nowhere else to go for Thanksgiving. I knew better. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a setup. Betty didn't care about my feelings. She wanted Elizabeth and Eric back together, and she wasn't afraid to show it. What made it worse was Eric's reaction. Instead of acknowledging how uncomfortable I felt, he told me I was overreacting. He said Elizabeth had changed and that there was nothing to worry about. Then, the final blow came. Betty told me that my negative energy was ruining dinner, so she asked me to sit at the kids' table instead of the main table. I was humiliated. Eric just stood there, not saying a word in my defense. I felt completely abandoned. When Eric sat down to catch up with Elizabeth, I knew I had reached my limit. Betty even threatened to exclude me from future family events if I made a scene. That was the moment I truly realized that I would never be a priority to Eric, not as long as his mother and Elizabeth were in the picture. Sitting at that table with the children, I felt like I was nothing in their eyes. I was tired of being disrespected, compared, and treated like I didn't matter. That night, I made a decision. I deserved better. I deserved a partner who stood up for me, a family that accepted me, and a relationship built on trust and respect, and I knew I wasn't going to find that with Eric. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I ever made. I walked away from a situation that was breaking me and found happiness again. Now, I'm in a much better place, surrounded by people who respect and appreciate me for who I am. To anyone going through something similar, know this: you are enough. You don't have to settle for a love that makes you feel small. You deserve to be with someone who chooses you every single day, without hesitation, without comparison, and without regret. I couldn't understand why I was being treated so badly. Eric, my husband, didn't seem to notice my discomfort. He was completely focused on Elizabeth, laughing and talking with her as if I wasn't even there. Meanwhile, Betty, his mother, looked pleased with herself. She had made sure I was seated at the children's table, away from the other adults. It was humiliating, but I refused to let her see me cry. I didn't want to give her that satisfaction. So, with a heavy heart, I sat with the children, trying to hold on to my dignity. Surprisingly, the kids were great company. They were between 10 and 12 years old, and we had a fun conversation. For a moment, I almost forgot about my pain, but every time I looked up, I saw Eric and Elizabeth together. They were so close, laughing and whispering, completely at ease with each other. It was as if my presence meant nothing to them. My heart ached. How could Eric do this to me, right in front of everyone? I needed a break, so I went to the kitchen to get some water. That's when I ran into Stephen, Eric's father. He looked confused when he saw me. "Why are you sitting with the children?" he asked. I told him that Betty had insisted on it and that it made me uncomfortable, especially with Elizabeth around. Stephen frowned. He wasn't happy about it either. He admitted that he didn't always agree with Betty's decisions, and her treatment of me seemed unfair. Stephen's words made me feel seen for the first time that evening. He was surprised to learn that Betty had threatened me and made it clear that he didn't support how she was treating me. He assured me that I deserved respect and kindness, something I hadn't received from Betty, or even from Eric lately. Talking to Stephen opened my eyes to the fact that I wasn't the only one who felt like an outsider in this family. He, too, had been pushed aside by Betty's controlling nature. Later that night, something unexpected happened. Stephen stood up in front of the entire family and spoke his mind. He thanked everyone for being there, but then his tone changed. He addressed the need for kindness and fairness in the family, making it clear that he was disappointed in how I had been treated. The room fell silent. Betty looked shocked, and Eric seemed uncomfortable. No one had ever dared to challenge Betty before, especially not in front of everyone. As Stephen continued, his words struck a nerve. He openly criticized Betty for still being attached to Eric's past relationship and for making my time with the family miserable. Then, he turned to Eric and called him out for not standing up for me. The tension in the room was unbearable. Betty's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Then, Stephen dropped a bombshell. He announced that he was divorcing Betty. The entire room gasped. Betty was furious. She protested, claiming that this wasn't the time for such an announcement. But Stephen remained firm. He was done being controlled by her. As if that weren't shocking enough, Stephen revealed that Betty had been unfaithful. He had evidence of her meeting with an ex, something she had lied about for years. The revelation left everyone speechless. Betty broke down, begging Stephen not to leave her, but he simply took his coat and walked out. After that, the family gathering quickly fell apart. People left, shaken by what had just happened. Eric, instead of coming home with me, decided to stay with his mother. He said she needed him, but in my mind, it was just another sign of where his true priorities lay. That night, I sat alone, replaying everything that had happened. Stephen's words stuck with me. If he could walk away from an unhappy marriage, then maybe I could too. I had spent so much time trying to make things work with Eric, but what had I gained? Nothing but heartache. The next evening, Eric came home looking exhausted. He told me all about the chaos that had unfolded in his family, but he barely addressed our own problems. When he mentioned that Elizabeth had been helping his mother, I realized I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't do this anymore. I told Eric I wanted a divorce. He was shocked. He insisted that Elizabeth wasn't the problem, that I was overreacting. He promised to change, but it was too late. I had already given him so many chances, and he had failed me every time. I needed to respect myself enough to walk away. Ending our marriage wasn't just about Eric, it was about me, about reclaiming my happiness. I had spent too much time feeling like I wasn't enough, like I had to fight for a place in his life, but I deserved better than that. Stephen, of all people, was the one who supported me the most. He understood what it felt like to be treated as an afterthought, and he encouraged me to move on. So, I did. I found a job in a new state, packed my things, and left the town that had brought me so much pain. Starting over was scary, but I knew it was the right choice. My journey wasn't easy, but it was a step toward a better life, one where I was valued, respected, and, most importantly, happy.